we're chatting here tonight. It's tonight for me and it's the morning for Katrina Rodabaugh, because Katrina's in the Hudson Valley in New York State, and we were going to be meeting in person, but now we're meeting on Zoom. So hi Katrina, it's so lovely to see you.
It's nice to see you also.
Yeah. And how are you coping during the lockdown period? How's it been going for you?
It's been very hard. I think we feel very fortunate because we're healthy and our immediate family members are healthy, and that, we feel very grateful for that. But we have two young children, ages 5 and 8, and they have been home with us the entire time. My husband and I are both working artists, so we both run very small businesses. And I think the challenge for us has been the work kid balance, right? We've been splitting the days, so we each have maybe 3 or 4 hours to work, but also running a small business in this time and trying to keep the work that was already in contract or the work that was already secured. And then noticing the work that's fallen away, anything that was in person, any of the events or classes that were in person have fallen away, and trying to come up with the bandwidth to create new programming. So I think that's been the biggest challenge for us is, just sort of navigating this with very little time to work, and yet the pressure to create these new programs to keep bringing in, the finances that we need to take care of our family. So it's been hard, but I think it's also been very humbling, and it's really made us so grateful for this homestead that we've been building for the last 5 years. We moved here from Oakland, California, 5 years ago, and little by little, we've just been expanding the garden and planting fruit trees and chickens and bees and redoing the house and the barns. And now this is our whole world, right? I mean, literally, for the four of us, my two children, my husband and I, this is our entire world, this 1 acre of land. So we feel incredibly grateful for that, and really see the fruits of our labor, so to speak, in terms of that space that we've been making.
Oh, it sounds lovely. I look forward to seeing it one day. But can you just tell us a little bit more about how you came to be doing what you're doing, Katrina, and about that journey?
Yeah. I feel like mine is like a very meandering journey, but so I was an environmental studies major in college 20 years ago, and I was actually an interdisciplinary major. I had to petition the college to be an environmental studies major because at the time environmental studies didn't exist as a major, which I always think of that as this sort of marker for me of activism and of change, right? Because now the college has this wonderful environmental studies department, and most colleges across the US have these departments as well. So it's really tremendous growth in 20 years. So I was an environmental studies major, and then I went straight to big cities and to art organizations, galleries and theaters and that sort of thing. And then I went back to school for creative writing and studied poetry and book arts. And so I had my creative practice, and I worked full time in galleries, and considered myself an environmentalist personally. But in my work, I've used recycled materials, reclaimed materials. But it was really the Rana Plaza factory collapse in 2013 that was just this huge light bulb moment for me, where I realized that personally, I'd spent a lot of time thinking about my food, even my home, my environment, having a garden, choosing wool fibers over synthetic fibers, that sort of thing, in my home goods, but not in my clothing. And so that was just this huge moment for me where I realized that in thinking about the basic needs of food, clothing, and shelter, I had sort of left clothing out in my own life. So I launched a personal project called Make Thrift Mend, and I decided for 1 year as a creative project, I wouldn't buy any new clothing, but I'd focus on making simple garments, shopping secondhand, and mending what I already owned. And from there, my work teaching, mending, and writing about sustainable fashion, and my online shop, everything over the last, 7 years has pivoted towards, sustainability and vibrant fashion. It was a long year.
You've written a book too, which is fabulous, and you really are a bit of a leading light in this area. Well done on that. That's great.
Thank you.
And how has the lockdown affected your ability to work? I see you're doing a lot more online things now, and you've got more kits in your on your online shop.
Yeah. Yeah. So my work sort of happens in three areas at this point anyway. Two years ago, I sort of took a step back to kind of analyze what was happening um, in my business, because I think sometimes these things really have a way of continuing without us, right? And so I kind of stepped back to realize there were really three areas that I was working in, and that was making work, either at the time I was doing more work for exhibition, but work online for sale, and then writing blogs, magazines, and my book, and then teaching. And most of the teaching for me has been in person. So if I step back and look at that now, the teaching is almost entirely gone away. It's either on pause or it's to be rescheduled at some point, because all that teaching was in person. So that I think has been the most affected. And then the online shop has been fantastic. I think those of us who have a virtual marketplace and that we've already been engaging with that, we're really fortunate during this time because that was something that could continue. And then, the writing and publishing is always kind of stop and go for me, right? Like I'll get a bunch of requests for articles or I'll solicit for articles, and, that kind of comes in waves anyway. So for me, I feel like that's kind of been on a similar trajectory also. But yeah, it's the in-person stuff. That's the big question mark, I think, for a lot of us.
Mm. And just reflecting on, like you mentioned, your education and that journey, but I'm just wondering also about your upbringing and your heritage. How's that influenced, I guess, what you're doing now and your ability to cope at this time?
Yeah. Well, I grew up in a very small town, and my mother's family has been from that area of the country for many, many, many generations. They were farmers, and then her grandfather had a lumber mill, sawmill, and they were really sort of agricultural workers. In the area, there's roads named after my great grandfather, that sort of thing. And so, but through that came, my great grandmother was a quilter, and my grandmother was a hobbyist artist, and my mother is very much a crafter. And so, through her, I really, and a gardener, they were all incredible gardeners. And my great grandmother was more of a homesteader, the chickens and the working with herbs and that sort of thing. And so, I kind of ran away from all of that. I mean, not the fiber art side, but I just wanted to be in big cities and be involved in the arts community and the creativity there. And so I feel like I'm sort of this hybrid of kind of having this like informal training in fiber arts and this sort of folk art heritage in a way, because they were up in the hollows, literally, where my mother's family came from, very land-based practices, a couple generations ago. And then I have this urban arts community world and this sort of conceptual art and community-based art. So I think the fiber art practice is just really a blessing right now for any of us who have any kind of handwork during this time. But the homesteading for me has really only come back in the last 5 years since we moved here. I always had small gardens. I didn't realize how small they were until I moved to an acre of land. And, we try to tend the whole acre to some respect. So yeah, so I feel like now it's really grounding us in a different way, to be here. But it's definitely it's this funny space, right, of sort of feeling like you're from two worlds, the sort of urban world and the rural world as well.
But I think it's that holistic approach that I observe in your work where, you can straddle those areas and straddle disciplines. And, you very much talk about seasons and, the whole permaculture systems. I think that's really important in the way forward with how we live in the world.
I think so. I hope so. I mean, I think one thing for us we have a professional farmer across the road from us. And so it's always been very humbling and kind of hilarious as we try to figure out what we're doing. And he's also he's just a very kind man. And so he'll come over, to bring us some wonderful vegetable. And we'll try to ask questions about like how to do the right thing, right, with our garden. And he'll just sort of nod and like maybe he'll answer us and maybe he won't. So I think in some ways it's kind of funny. It always cracks me up when people think we've got like the homesteading side figured out, because it is experiment. It's a trial and error over here every year, right? But I think it's given us such incredible respect for friends of ours in the area that are full-time farmers. or, our neighbors who they have other work and they professionally farm. It is really, it connects you to land in a way that I think is really hard to describe otherwise, because you're connected to all of the challenges with the land too, right? In terms of the weather, in terms of, we have groundhogs, woodchucks. That's like our biggest pet. They're a pretty big rodent in rural areas. These things that like you don't think about when you think about this like beautiful, right? Like sort of pastoral life that we're constantly trying to figure out how to convert more of the grass in our yard to edibles and dye plants and that kind of thing. But yeah, it's also very meaningful, and I think it's important. It's very touching for me to work with the plants and to work with the seasons and to expand my knowledge of plants, to expand the plants that I can identify, to expand their uses, and their place in the ecosystem, right? I mean, that's life's work. I mean, it's a lifetime of work. For me, I'm personally interested in the plants that are what I call the triple power plants. So the plants that are edible, medicinal, and dye plants. And you realize that there's a whole world of, just those plants. And then there's all the different varieties of those plants. Yeah, I think it's amazing. And that's one thing I've come to really cherish about a rural life that I wasn't able to have in urban areas, just because I had, like tiny little stoops or whatever for potted plants. Yeah, it's been pretty great.
And what are your favorite plants that
Oh,
you?
that's a hard question. Um, well, it changes. I feel like it grows each year. I'm currently trying to create nettles patches all over my property. So stinging nettles is, really considered a nuisance to some people, but it's an amazing plant. It's very high in nutrition. It's very nutritionally dense. It's a dye plant. It's edible. We grind it up and put it in soup. So that's a plant I'm sort of interested in. Roses are also an amazing plant. I think that I always thought they were sort of cliche, but you realize that they are also a medicinal plant. They create beautiful color on cloth. It's tricky to get that color on cloth with rose. And they just have this legacy, right, of beauty also. So those are two that I'm planting more and more of. But there's a lot of really common plants too, dandelion and clover and violets and things that people consider weeds, are really beautiful, potent color as well, and edibles as well. So I have a lot of favorite plants.
And, can you tell us about? I mean, I guess you're very grounded and aware anyway, but I just wonder whether the lockdown has heightened your awareness about where your resources come from and minimizing waste.
Yeah. Sorry, I don't know if you can hear my children in the background. Well, yeah, that's a good question. We live in upstate New York. We're 2 hours north of Manhattan. So we have a really productive growing season, June, July, August, September. Some things start coming around April, May. Some things will go as long as November. It's very hard to find local produce here, December, January, February, even March. So I think that was something, moving from California, that was something that was really heightened to me right away, because in Oakland, California, you have, I think it's an 11-month growing season officially. So you can get fresh produce all year round. And there's such a movement there around slow food and sustainable food. So here, there's a period of time where we just sort of don't have access to local produce anyway. So I think that there is that kind of divide, or we have less access. The thing that I've noticed in the lockdown, we have a local farm pretty nearby, and they've been an amazing resource right from the beginning. And it's good timing in terms of the time of the year, because they're coming into their, a busy season. But they created this online purchasing system. They have curbside pickup for all local produce. And they're also working with other local farms to have the produce available at their farm stand. And it's just been amazing for us to watch that they have really assumed this place in community organizing in this time. And that's something this farm in particular is good at anyway. So I think that has made us realize how important it is to support them and how much we want to, support that community. We have some other small groceries nearby that have also tried really hard to support local bakers and, some of the local farms and things like that. in terms of what we can't get here, I mean, there's so much we can't get here, like in the winter. So I think we're coming out of that. Um, and we've, changed some of our habits too. My kids eat so much fruit, so that's been a challenge, right? Just like keeping the fresh fruit around. But I think that also, yeah, you don't take it for granted. The strawberries start to go bad, and then we made strawberry rhubarb pie, right? Or like I think you really, the fruit has become really precious for us, for sure. We have chickens, so we've been lucky to have access, to eggs the whole time, which I know they've been hard to come by. So I think it sort of shifts. It's definitely shifted our thoughts and, what we can access, and what we want to support too.
And you mentioned before about, being a fibre artist is good at this time. I just want to explore that whole idea of using your hands and the connection to well-being and making you feel good. And it's not just about fibre either, is it? It's around cooking and gardening and all of those things that are probably very much part of your life anyway. Have you found that you go to it more at this time?
I find the creative projects I can pick up and put down are the ones that I'm drawn to right now. And that's mostly because my young children are here all the time now, right? So knitting, I'm a very new knitter. I'm a very basic knitter, only a couple of years, but it's so easy to just pick it up and put it down. There's no sharp objects for, my little one or anything like that. So that's been really nice. I have this shawl I've been working on. The kids will be doing their homeschooling. My oldest is in 3rd grade, so he's doing it online. My little one's 5, he's still in preschool, so he's doing it at this table. And there's just this sort of moment of like, oh, wait a minute, I can sort of grab my knitting and maybe knit a few rows. I'm still mending. And plant dyes for me too is another thing that anything that can be distracted is the work I find I'm able to do around my children, interrupted, or I can be sort of distracted. So yeah, knitting and stitching and dyeing. And then we're turning to the garden a lot, prepping the garden for spring and starting our seeds and pruning the trees and that kind of thing. I haven't been able to take on any big creative projects. I don't think I really have the bandwidth for that right now between watching the kids and trying to run my business. But I know some folks have, and I think that's, tremendous. If you're quarantining by yourself, I imagine it's a very different experience than I'm having, as a mom with young kids. But that's one thing I loved about mending from the beginning too, is that my children were young and that I could spend 15 minutes and put it down, spend 20 minutes and put it down, in a way that when I'm making a garment or something like that, I need more mental capacity to follow the pattern and remember where I'm at in the pattern and that sort of thing. Whereas hand mending or hand work, right, any kind of hand stitching, it's very forgiving to be interrupted. I think it's sort of lends itself to that in a way.
And I notice you go for walks in the morning. Can you just tell us a little bit about your daily routine and how that helps you, be healthy and sane at this time?
Yeah, well, I've always been a walker and a hiker also. That also came from my mom. I've beautiful memories of her very young hiking up and down the hills where we lived, and she could always hike so fast up those hills, and I was so small, right? And I was like, how does she do that? And now I realize that I think it's just it's mental health, it's well-being, it's also the connection. I really love walking outdoors. I walk outdoors even when it's very, very cold here. The only time I really don't walk outdoors is if it's raining or if it's sleeting. I'll even walk in the snow. But it's, you're outside, it's the connection to the outdoors, the connection to whatever road you're walking on. I mean, just in the time of quarantine, I've come across a coyote in the road. We definitely surprised each other. There's been deer in the road. There's an injured bird I helped get out of the road. So I think you start having this interaction. That's what I think is really the magic about plants or gardening or dyeing or any kind of relationship, any kind of practice that you have with the land. You keep showing up to the same spot, right? And you keep noticing all these subtleties about the spot. I have the same walk. It's about a 2-mile walk, but I notice different things every time. Or the kids and I take field walks in our neighbor's field. And so it's been 9 weeks now. And just yesterday when we walked, they were like, oh, look, the grass is too high to walk there now. Right? Whereas in the beginning, the grass was just coming up again, watching the fruit trees come into bloom. I mean, I think there's just something really important and beautiful about whatever that daily rhythm is, whether it's meditation or exercise or creative practice, whatever that thing is that we can show up to on a daily basis and see how it changes. And I think that can really be really, really meaningful, even transformative, truly. So yeah, I do. I walk and I garden and I stitch and then I'm on the computer, right? And then I'm trying to help my children, and it's not as slow and lovely as I'd like it to be. It's also pretty frantic sometimes. But yeah,
Yeah. So it sounds like you've given us your best advice there. That's fabulous. I'm just wondering what changes you think might be on the other side of what's happening now, you know, in terms of social, cultural, economic changes as a result of lockdown and really the impact of the pandemic.
yeah. I really don't know. I guess two things that come to mind, like just thinking about this network that our local farm has created and this incredible service that they've created. I hope that there is really that respect, I guess, and even reverence for those local communities and those local organizations that are really digging into the community right now and supporting us in ways that we can support them back. I think the other thing that'd be very interesting is the transition from live events to virtual events. I mean, there's such a abundance of that right now, right? My husband works in theater. He's a designer for performing arts. And so his whole life has been about in-person events. And we were talking about the trend in his world to seeing theater moving online. And he was mentioning how the divide was always the screen, because you had television and film and then you had stage. And that was actually the divide, like even in the union and the contracts and everything. And so I think that's a fascinating difference. And I wonder if there'll be more of a reverence for live events and teaching in person and they'll just be much smaller, or if that will sort of, the trend of that, might kind of go away depending on how the pandemic plays out, how long it takes until we can sort of resume contact in larger groups again. So yeah, I don't know.
And what about the impact on slow fashion? Do you feel there's any more shift happening there? I mean, there has been a huge shift since Rana Plaza raised awareness, but will it go further?
I mean, I think there's been a tremendous shift in the last 7 years. When I started my fast, I had a really hard time finding certain garments that now are much easier to find. You could always find like a nice linen tunic, so to speak, but like organic cotton leggings or undergarments, socks, outerwear, those sorts of things that rely more on synthetics or conventional cottons. So I think there's already been a tremendous change, and I don't think that will reverse. I think that the companies that are interested in sustainability and ethical fashion, I imagine that those are core values, right, to their company. So I don't imagine that those are going to go away. In terms of the larger fast fashion industry, I mean, I don't have a lot of experience working in the industry or even advocating within that industry. But I don't really know. I mean, I think my worry is that there will be such an economic crisis, and that the focus will return on sort of building the economy at any means necessary. And that frightens me, because I think that's how we got to this mess environmentally to begin with, right? Is really, really forgetting our limitations and really forgetting those sort of core values around taking care of people and the planet. Um, that sort of model of profit over people. I mean, I feel like that's how we got to this environmental crisis that we're in, much slower, obviously, than the pandemic crisis. But on the other hand, I do feel like there's this incredible interest right now in baking and gardening. The place where we get chickens, we got 6 new chicks this year, and they were sold out in a few hours, whereas usually they're sold out in several days of baby chicks. So I think that there is this real interest right now in homesteading, baking, and crafting, again, that handcrafting. So I think that can be so powerful for people and so meaningful. I hope that isn't just a sort of flash in the pan. I hope that will have the staying power that could be really important to sustainability, slow fashion.
Well, it's been lovely to talk to you, Katrina. Thank you
It's
so much for your
lovely.
time. It's
Thank
really
you.
great, and I hope one day we can meet in person.
I would love that. I'd love to have you
Yeah,
up here. That would
yeah,
be
that'd be great. All right, we'll see you then.
thank you, Jane.